boredom's the wrong word, but that sort of quiet time allows you to, your mind to wander and think about what might be possible in the future, really.
Hey everyone, this week I'm excited to say we've got our latest site-specific episode. About a year and a half ago, I thought it would be helpful to get out of the studio once in a while and go directly to the source. Since then, we've recorded the odd, time-sensitive interview at a site of architectural interest with meaningful connections to the guest. The first was with the theater director Robert Wilson in his archive room at the Watermill Center on Long Island. The second was with the architect and furniture maker Mira Nakashima inside the Sanso Villa at the George Nakashima Woodworkers Compound in New Hope, Pennsylvania. The third, recorded last summer, was with the architecture critic Paul Goldberger at the Glass House in New Canaan, Connecticut. For our fourth and latest, I headed to the Cotswolds in the UK, where I sat down with the British architectural designer John Pawson at his country home there. A quick note here that you can find photographs from our visit on our timesensitive.fm website, as well as eventually on the slowdown.media Instagram. Across his 4+ decades of design work, John has gained worldwide recognition and a cult following for making exceptionally simple, or what many would call minimalist, spaces. Through his meticulous, forensic-level approach to his work, John refines things down to their most essential and ethereal. And this house, for himself and his family, which he designed and built from 2013 to 2019, could be considered his magnum opus. Or at least that's how I see it. The rhythmic composition of buildings, a farmhouse, a barn, and stables mainly, integrates a hodgepodge of 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th century structures via John's light, sensitive, modernist touch. Being there, a certain intensity of feeling overcame me. There's a clarifying atmospheric power to the place that reveals how much care and attention went into each and every detail and decision. Truly, it's a sensation that's hard to describe even here. I would classify much of John's work as monastic, and perhaps not so surprisingly, monks have long been one of his primary clients. Since 1999, John has been building a city-like campus in the Czech Republic for the monks of the Cistercian Trappist order. He has also designed other ecclesiastical spaces over the years, including a monastery in Burgundy, a basilica in Hungary, and a church in Germany. But this is just part of John's journey. As we discuss on this episode, his practice largely took off with a commission in the early 90s from Calvin Klein to design his brand's New York City flagship store on Madison Avenue. It was a project that would forever alter the course of John's life and career. In the 30 years since that store's opening, John has designed everything from hotels in Los Angeles, Madrid, and Tel Aviv to London's Design Museum, to private homes in Colorado, Germany, Greece, Japan, New York, Spain, Sweden, and beyond, from a bridge and an opera stage set to yachts, from a chair and cookware to lamps, linens, doorknobs, bowls, cutlery, and even a steak knife. John has also published multiple books over the years, most notably The Career-Defining Minimum from 1996, which we talk about at length on this episode, and most recently, Home Farm Cooking from 2021, a cookbook he co-authored with his wife, Catherine. Also on the episode, we explore his long-term relationship with and affinity for Japan and Japanese design, his deep-seated belief in restraint, both in life and in architecture, and his humble, highly refined approach to creating sacred spaces. As you'll hear, this conversation is John at his best, and by that I mean dry, British, witty, and, you guessed it, beautifully spare in his words and thinking. Before we get into the episode, I'd first like to thank our Season 11 presenting sponsor, the high jewelry maison Van Cleef & Arpels, which this year is collaborating with the American Museum of Natural History in New York to present the exhibition Cosmic Splendor, jewelry from the collections of Van Cleef & Arpels, an awe-inspiring assemblage of jewelry creations, timepieces, and precious objects with astronomical references from the Maison's patrimonial collection, as well as from private loans. From dramatic necklaces depicting rockets in flight, to gem-encrusted pendants inspired by distant nebulae, to watches with intricate mechanisms that trace the transit of planetary bodies. Cosmic Splendor features nearly 70 astrological, celestial, and mythological creations that celebrate the wonders and mysteries of the cosmos. Among the enchanting universe of pieces on display are a diamond-studded yellow, gold, and platinum meteor clip from 1951, a yellow, gold, and ruby moon pendant from 1969 that's a celebration of the Apollo 11 moon landing, and a gold, sapphire, and diamond Diana clip depicting the goddess of the moon from 2011. These works trace the stylistic evolution and the level of expertise that this high jewelry maison, founded in Paris's Place Vendôme in 1906, has developed throughout its history. You can purchase admission tickets or learn more about Cosmic Splendor at www.amnh.org/exhibitions. That's amnh.org/exhibitions. And now, here's my conversation with John. Hi, John. Welcome to Time Sensitive.
Thank you.
And how incredible to be here in your home in the Cotswolds recording this.
Well, it's very comfortable for me. Thank you for coming all that way. I haven't had to do much yet.
Well, you did recently come back to the UK from India and Japan, and these are two countries that have been incredibly important to you, I would say, to you and your work, instrumental even, certainly in the case of Japan. Mm-hmm. What stands out from your most recent trip?
I think going back to both of them, both places I've had extraordinary experiences, and of course with India, where one visit, my client, we were in a terrible car crash and my client was killed. And
oh, wow. That's
always, I mean, it doesn't prey on me or anything, but it's always at the back of my mind. And the irony
is... You were in the car?
Yeah, I was in the car and the driver was maimed for life and I lost Mark, or the client was killed. And you have to step in and organize things, even though you're in shock yourself, because there's no... India's quite wild.
So
in the countryside.
When was this?
Oh, this is a long time ago. This is in 2002.
Okay.
But, these things stay.
Right.
You might as well.
Yeah, 20 years later.
Yes, it might as well be yesterday. But, but we've had very, very good times. It's just I never quite get over that. I know exactly what happens when you're driving. But I have the same in England. It's not especially India. And Japan, of course, I spent 4 years there, so it's always very special going back.
Yeah, Japan, we've talked a bit about this in the past, but it's played this vital and certainly formative role in your approach to architecture. You've also built many projects there, including a Calvin Klein store, which was your first commission in the country in 1994, Tetsuka House from 2005. Your journey in Japan began with a short-lived vision.
I know where this is going.
Of becoming a Zen Buddhist monk. We don't need to go deep into that story because you have previously told it beautifully and hilariously. And to the listeners who are curious, you can definitely Google John Pawson, Japan Zen Buddhist Temple, and you will probably find the story.
Find the gory details.
Rather than becoming a Zen Buddhist monk, you stayed in Japan and taught English for 3 years. And during this time, you also befriended the designer Shiro Kurumada, a relationship that would prove life and career changing. And this fostered your interest in architecture further. You visited traditional ryokan inns, the temples of Kyoto, the Katsura Imperial Villa, and these new Ando buildings that were going up at the time. I guess in hindsight, how do you think about these early years in Japan and also your time since engaged with Japan, with Japanese culture? You return to the country often.
I mean, I went to Japan because I was already keen on Japanese things and the things behind Japanese, I suppose, 17th century architecture or 16th century architecture. But I was also influenced by my hometown of Halifax in Yorkshire and the moors there, which are sort of treeless. So it's not that Japan was a beginning of that kind of journey. But it certainly cemented everything aesthetically that I was interested in. And it was a strange time in a way, because Nagoya is not a metropolis. And also Halifax in Yorkshire is not either. But if you spend time in those places, which I did growing up, or after, I left my father's business, spending 3 or 4 years in Japan, you spend them in Nagoya, which is not is not such an exciting place culturally. They're very, very, very nice people. But you have a lot of sort of free time, which is not exciting. And in a way, that boredom's the wrong word, but that sort of quiet time allows you to, your mind to wander and think about what might be possible in the future, really. So Halifax stimulated me in a different way, and Nagoya did as well.
How do you think about your Kuramata time, I guess I should call it?
Well, I had that naivety of, I hate to call it arrogance, but I had that sort of confidence at age 24 to call him up and say, how do you do? I'm John Pawson. Can we have a coffee? He was a well-established, very famous, top of his game designer, architect in Japan. And here was I, literally nothing. He must have thought, well, there must be something about this chap to ring up. He must be important in some way, which of course I wasn't. So, yeah, it changed everything a bit. Me meeting him. I didn't spend that much time with, but he was very, very kind to me, and knowing him gave you an introduction to sort of anybody in the design world or the arts.
How do you see Kuramata alive in your work, in your practice? What elements or things do you think you took from him?
I was more attracted to his interior design work and his architecture than I was to the furniture, because I'm not a big furniture person. And he said to me, "Oh, you will understand." I didn't express it, of course, so bluntly to him, but he said, "You'll get the point of the work and the poetry in the future." And I never really have. Of course, I've appreciated it, and it's what's made him famous. But I'm quite happy with the very little furniture, so, and not as art, really.
I want to bring up Minimum, this 1996 book.
What's that?
It's this book that someone named John Pawson put together about a decade into his career, which I guess next year is turning 30. And in it, you write quite a bit about Japan, including about the Japanese tea master Senno Rikyu's attitudes that they, quote, perhaps have even more relevance today than they did in Japan's golden age 4 centuries ago, despite vastly changed circumstances. In the 3 decades since you wrote that, it's probably become only more so in this time blinkered age we find ourselves in.
I think minimum is a very, very good word. The definition of it does express everything you want about the spareness. But minimalism or minimal or any of the other things is always a dangerous area. To try and make it into a movement or a brand or a cult, I've always found it difficult. Right at the beginning, they tried to make an ism out of it and suggest that there was a movement, and they couldn't find any other minimal architects. So they lumped me with all sorts of high-tech and postmodern people, which I just didn't see the logic. 20 years later or 30 years later, there are lots and lots of very good architects doing minimal work. And, when I see them, I think, gosh, either did I do that, or rather more to the point, I would like to have done that, because they're actually doing what I do and often doing it better in the photographs. And so it's a strange thing to, at the time, finding it difficult because you're like swimming against the stream. And then suddenly, because you haven't been, looking up from your desk, it's become very popular. And lots of practitioners of it.
But I mean, classically, I feel like trends flip-flop, though, no? I mean, it does seem like we're in a sort of maximalist moment right now.
I mean, it's always been the case that there's both sides to it. And we're talking really historically in obviously a very narrow thing. As soon as you get labeled, then there's a chance that whatever you've been labeled as will go out of fashion or not count but it's all bollocks. No, because it's not to do with fashion or what's in vogue or anything. It's to do with quality and an idea and something that you're pursuing. I mean, Senarique, from what you read and what you study, he's one man in 400 years or 500 years. I mean, he's once in a lifetime.
Once in many lifetimes.
And once in several millennium. I mean, he's the man.
Just staying on Japan a bit longer, you write of this concept shibui.
Yeah.
That's shibui. I'd never heard of this. You describe it as the studied restraint that might be best described as knowing when to stop. And you're writing about it in relation to the work of Ando and Kuramada, who both exhibit this
shibui. Yeah.
And I guess I'd say you've proven yourself to be a shibui architect too.
Well, you could never say that about yourself. If you're English and modest, or trying to be modest. Restraint is, I can see how difficult it is to be restrained. It's like, name dropping, or you're in conversation and you have an idea, or you want to tell an anecdote or a story, and if it's somebody famous, you're dropping the name, and you can't do that really politely, unless you're brash.
Yeah, that seems like a very maybe properly British approach. I don't know that Americans take quite the same tact.
Can I just I've got a list here. Can I just tell you the famous people I met this week? Yeah. I was just walking down the street and...
I think what's interesting in the context of your career is, on some level, not necessarily a vicinity to famous people, but, I do feel like it's worth bringing up Calvin Klein here. And I bring him up because, and I know I mentioned that you had done his store in Japan, but this year actually marks 30 years since you completed your New York City flagship for Calvin Klein.
Yeah.
This is a project that changed your life. You first met him in 1993 through the hotelier Ian Traeger, and you've spoken about this before, so I won't go into that fortuitous introduction, but I guess instead of asking about this, when I was researching for today, I came across this New York Times review about the flagship store by Paul Goldberger.
Oh.
And I wanted to quote from it, because I feel like Paul was early on to the John Pawson tip and how he writes about your work and the project. There's some really interesting foreshadowing. He writes, "There can be a beauty, even a power in spareness, and a majesty to carefully wrought austerity. Like good prose, good design has been edited to its essence and possesses both discipline and dignity." He continues, "With its almost monastic austerity, the Calvin Klein store is about as far from warm and cuddly as you can get. But it is a truly impressive piece of work, self-assured and rigorous, and it creates a stunning setting for Mr. Klein's products."
Wow.
And I think it's a testament to the power that it lasted for 25 years unchanged. Taking a moment to consider this 30 years, I wanted to ask, where do you see this particular project within what's occurred post for you?
Well, as you said, I owe everything to Calvin. He not just changed my career, but changed my life. And it was a very nice relationship. It was interesting because it was really, he was looking for somebody young that he could work with that would really realize his ideas. And it was quite funny, the two of us together, because neither of us can draw very well. So it was an interesting couple of years of design work together. But it's very much his imprint is there completely on it. I mean, which is true of most clients, is that each project you do with a different client is going to have a different imprint. But talking career-wise, it gave other people the confidence. Calvin didn't need it. He had an instinct and he had a confidence, and he didn't need me to be authenticated by somebody else, which is very lucky for me. As soon as I did the store, then Cathay Pacific, the airline, it was easier for them to hire me, and the monks.
Yeah, we'll get to the monks. Just to return to this Goldberger piece, there's another sentence which just totally stuck out to me. He writes, Mr. Pawson understands the essence of minimalism, which is not just a matter of eliminating things, but of distilling what remains into something as close to perfect as possible. And notes that your work, quote, brings to mind Strunk and White's Elements of Style, which counsels that the essence of good writing is not brevity, but, quote, that every word tell. Reading this, I immediately thought of, I was going through some of your other books other than Minimal, and I came across the epigraph of Plain Space from 2010. It's a Raymond Carver quote. It's difficult to be simple. So, taking a literary allusion, and I don't think I've ever heard you speak about this or asked you about this, but do you think about your architecture as a form of sentence making or storytelling?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I was, while you were talking about it, I was reading Paul Goldberger's words. I mean, what's very, very nice for me is that describing architecture with words is more accurate than photographs for me. It's much more evocative, a better way to describe something that, obviously there's nothing better than being there, but not being able to be there, to have it written about. And Paul Goldberger, writes very well, very articulate and minimal. So, I remember the piece very well. I mean,
the other side of the piece, which I haven't mentioned, is he bashes Peter Marino's Armani store.
Oh, well, we should always try and be positive about everything. I'm not in the business of certainly other people's work.
Yeah, well, it's in the name, architecture critic, right? I think it's interesting that you mentioned writing, because to me, when I think about your creative process, I think about photography, obviously.
Yeah.
It's so central to what you do in so many ways. How do you view the role of photography?
Well, photography is very sort of particular and presents you each time with one sort of view, which is the guy taking it, I guess, or the person taking the photograph. So in my case, I wouldn't ever think of my photographs as being able to describe the architecture in the round, so to speak. You can describe one aspect of it, or you can highlight things, and that's why I think that the written word is better for description. Of course, if you just presented clients with words, they'd very quickly say, "Oh, where's the photograph?" And and I say to the guys in the office, "Show me the photograph." When they come back and say they saw light falling on a window in the house, I say, "Well, where's the photograph? Don't tell me about it." So I'm the worst person for that. If I had a dream, it would be to have somebody write about each project in depth.
A book about your work without any photos?
Well, yeah, I guess. But then I was thinking, gosh, that would... Yeah, the book, exactly.
That's not a biography.
Yeah, no. Just about the actual building or the work or I don't know. Oh. I mean, there's been... Bruce Chatwin did that short piece, which was It was really nice.
Who you did a project for very early on.
Yeah, yeah. He wrote the piece inside an apartment I'd done, and it took him, I think, like 4 days of writing for, a few hundred words. So it was a crafted piece, all right. He handwrote it, and after he'd finished, because I was around, in and out from time to time, and I saw him, and he'd be filling up the waste paper basket with these handwritten things, which, of course, I'd rescued. Now I can't find them. But architects are supposed to be good at describing their own work, otherwise they sort of can't get jobs, or they can't. And you do need to be able to convince people or to describe things to get things what you want. But it's not a facility I have, really. Clients always, when we go first time to a site and I'm looking around, you have to deal with them as clients because it's usually the first time, and then you've got to deal with the site, and then you've got to tell them what your idea is, even though, of course, you don't have an idea because you've only just been to the site. And I now know why architects do that false thing of, sketching on site for the first moment, because it shuts the clients up.
Yeah, time to think, time to convince.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to go back to Minimum, this 1996 book I mentioned earlier, because it explores simplicity as it can be applied to architecture, but also this broader idea of simplicity as a way of life. I feel like writing this book, at least how I see it and interpret it, was this catalyzing moment for you in a way, putting words to paper that helped define, not as a manifesto, but sort of helped refine or define what it is you were up to. Is that how you see it?
Very much. And I think it has been misinterpreted, of course, as things. But actually, what happened early on is that Phaidon had this idea to write a book about the notion of simplicity in architecture, and they asked Dejan Sujic to write it. For whatever reason, it kind of wasn't for him, and so he proposed me. And I said, oh, brilliant, I'll write 100,000 words about it, and you pay for me to have a year off. Because I didn't know anything about publishing or writing or the finances. So I thought they'd support me for a year while I tinkered with this thing. And they said, well, actually, we'll give you a small share of the book, or whatever they call it, fee, and we only want 10,000 words because we're an illustrated book company. I think I did 12,000 words. In my head, it was going to be more about the thinking.
There's a beautiful bit about time in the book, and I wanted to quote it. You write, "This is a thread that runs through 5,000 years of mankind's existence, that links the pyramids of ancient Egypt and the classicism of the Hellenic temples of Sicily with the monasteries of the Cistercians," maybe a foreshadowing.
Yeah.
"And the furniture made by the Shakers, a thread that spans all nations and all civilizations." I was just thinking about this profundity. I know you mentioned 16th and 17th century Japan interests you. I know from other conversations, ancient Egypt, classical Greece, these things are deep interests of yours. The book itself is sort of a catalog in some ways of your affinities. It's going from Rothko to Judd to Le Corbusier to Ryoanji and Kyoto to Agnes Martin. I mean, I could go on.
Please don't go on.
No, it's interesting that it's sort of a blueprint in some sense, or a sort of, it's a deeply personal book. It's more than just a book about.
Oh, it is. And also you have an idea, but then you're not quite sure how you're going to realize it. So I had to start somewhere. I just started with, things that had always attracted me to them, like Brancusi or, as you said, Agnes Martin, or certain artists, certain buildings, certain periods, or some engineering things, bridges and so on, without
Do you have a B-2 bomber in the book? That was
That
was a curveball.
Yeah, I think... Yes, it's like there are so many no-nos, like anything to do with war or guns is the wrong thing. Just a form. I think there's since perhaps been swapped.
Yeah. Well, how do you think about bookmaking within what it is that you do? Because you have made many books. I think you've made a lot more books than most architects make books.
I think made more books than most people make books. There was one point at which they used to say, "Oh, you're the architect that does the books." And before that, I was the architect that did Calvin Klein or the monks. I mean, it's hard work, but it's important for me as a way of looking back and rationalizing the thoughts and collating them and then moving on. And I've been lucky with Phaidon because it's a sort of discipline to do a book and the collecting of the material and the editing and so on. It's all...
Are you working on a book now?
Always. There was a period when I really had done a bit too much, so I took a few years off.
And the most recent book Phaidon put out with your name on it was actually written by your friend Diane Sujic, our friend. He writes in it about this notion of the timeless, which I wanted to quote from because I think, some people like to describe your work as timeless. I don't think that's entirely accurate. Maybe we could get into that. But he writes, timeless is one of the most overused words in any architectural discussion. John's architecture is, of course, of its time, but seen as a body of work, it is striking how little touched it has been by time passing. It is a connection with fundamentals of light and space that makes its qualities lasting and memorable. How do you think about time, this temporalness in your work? And do you think there is a timeless nature, or where do you see time playing into your projects?
Well, I think you were right when you said there isn't such a thing as timelessness. I mean, I'm sure with careful look at it or something, people will be able to date my work in the future. I've never done it for the legacy part of it. I've just been very much in the moment. I mean, there aren't really rules. I mean, there are rules, but in how I design, but humor is not something that you can put into architecture, I believe. It doesn't stand up in bricks and mortar, and it doesn't stand the time. So I tend to be quite careful about how I design and use so that it is at least lasting. Having been doing it now for 40 or 50 years, I'm in a position that some of the houses, all the projects are 30 or 40 years old. And what's very, very nice for me is how some of them, like the Mallorca house, is exactly the same as it was 30 years ago and is enjoyed. They rent it out quite a lot, so it's enjoyed by tons of different people. And on the other hand, Tilty Barn has been bought by a Chinese fashion designer. So he will live in it very similarly, but it's a completely different owner. The Doris Saatchi house, Hayes Mews in the West End of London, that's now got a new American owner, and who wants it to keep it the same. So, and of course they develop a patina, which is nice.
Hey everyone, taking a quick break here to tell you a little bit about our Season 11 presenting sponsor, the high jewelry maison Van Cleef & Arpels, which this year is collaborating with the American Museum of Natural History in New York to present the exhibition Cosmic Splendor, jewelry from the collections of Van Cleef & Arpels, an awe-inspiring assemblage of jewelry creations, timepieces, and precious objects with astronomical references. Featuring nearly 70 celestial, mythological, and astrological jewelry creations that celebrate the wonders and mysteries of the cosmos, the exhibition presents an enchanting universe of jewelry from the Maison's patrimonial collection, as well as contemporary creations, some of them on loan from private collections. You can purchase admission tickets or learn more about Cosmic Splendor at www.amnh.org/exhibitions. That's amnh.org/exhibitions. And now, back to the episode. Well, I think there's something interesting that occurs when a building is carefully made and then cared for. There's sort of a shepherding that sometimes occurs, right? Because there's a respect. It's like an object. It's like passing down an heirloom in some sense, right?
Absolutely, yeah. The house in London we've been in since 1997, that's getting on for 30 years, just under. It's hard because, I'm 76 in May, 75 now, but it's only been pointed out to me that I am. Because, I sit here thinking I'm your age or younger. I mean, if I could look in the mirror, then of course, this is a rude shock. But so to stop and think, well, there's 40 years work behind, because I don't feel really any different, and I don't design in any significantly different way. I mean, what's nice for me is the process or the mechanics or the office runs a bit more smoothly, and the clients are respectful, and there's a great team. There's a much bigger variety of projects, so you can build a bigger, wider, more Catholic portfolio, which I'm interested in. I'm interested in doing different things all the time, and not necessarily what people think of as architecture. I mean, for me, architecture's knives and forks are architecture.
Yeah, you've done knives, forks, bowls, lighting, a chair.
Which is the most difficult, normally.
A few yachts.
Yeah. Ballet, bridge, different scales. And and we were working in 17 different countries, so which is also nice. Different cultures.
How has your relationship to time changed as the firm has scaled or evolved? Because I imagine early on in the practice, you probably had maybe more time to work on a project, focus, think.
Well, right at the beginning, when Claudio and I did the Mallorca house, that was our only project for 6 months. There's nothing else, so we kind of overworked it. I mean, we went back but just keep on.
Well, I think something that gets lost in conversations, because we, as you pointed out, sort of exist in this idea of architecture as image, where it's like just it's the classic, what was the Philip Johnson quote? The three F's.
Yeah.
I'm going to forget it, but the second one's photography, and the third one's finish, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think forget is definitely not in my vocabulary. Definitely finish, but not forget.
The thing is I think the time that goes into building, to design, to taking care, I think that then translates on the other side of it. And even if the work, which I think is the point of a lot of your work, may appear simple, it's all the layers and depth that occurred during the time of the making of the design, the things that you don't see that were eliminated or are subtly there and present, but aren't screaming out for attention.
It's funny because I think early on, there was one of those aphorisms which said, don't tell me about the struggle. Whereas, of course, there's this whole movement that want to show the workings of how you get to these projects, how they get to be made and finished. And I mean, our stuff takes an awful long time and an awful lot of reworking and working. And occasionally we get careful and scientific and work out how many hours or days or people you need to do the job and how long it's going to take. And of course, we can't afford to do anything, because they're all, when you work it out, you just need so much time if you're designing things in detail. It's not possible, but it would be nice to do, new objects or new stuff for the architecture. New vases or new tables or chairs. And we're doing more of that because we're in a position.
Yeah, I mean, yours is an expansive definition of architecture, I think, even though some people might not consider it so.
Well, I don't know whether I still do, but I come in for a lot of criticism. And if you do a cookbook and you're a serious architect, they seem to see that doesn't quite match, but I don't understand that. I just take an interest in most things that are going on around me.
Yeah, cooking and architecture definitely have connection.
I thought so.
Ingredients, materials, the senses. Taste.
Yeah, definitely taste. Yeah.
Well, this is a good segue to Home Farm, where we're sitting. You did do a cookbook, Home Farm Cooking, with your wife, Catherine.
Yeah.
This project involved 5 intense years of work, probably more than that in terms of gestation and just ideas you had about a country house. And you created what I would describe as architectural forensics to realize this place. I mean, there's a certain intensity of feeling here, walking the grounds. And, I've only been here for a few hours now, and I feel it. This alchemy of materials and atmosphere and character and light, shadow. I'm sure a big part of this is because the project is so personal. I'm sure another part of it is the very location we're sitting. I mean, the light is just constantly changing as we're talking right now. I guess there's a big question here, but how did you bring together this idiosyncratic hodgepodge of 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th century structures? And how did you make sense of this site to make it your own?
Well, it is what we do. Half the work that we do is working on existing buildings of different historic periods and things like that. And half what we do is contemporary and new build. And atmosphere is obviously, to me, the number one thing you're after. But it is highly complicated and does take time. And obviously you don't have everything in place when you start. I had to consider the 17th, 18th, 19th century hinges on different doors around the place. And because they needed to be replaced. Are you going to have modern ones? Are you going to have the right period, and that's just one of 3,000 decisions. The difficulty with your own place, or not difficulty, or the challenge is that you have too many options. So you review it too much. If you're not the client, although I sort of make myself the client of every job, but you have a deadline and you have budgets, and you have what's considered appropriate, because even the most, well-off or secure clients don't necessarily want to spend all their money on, room by me. So you have strict budgets, things like that, and time frame, and so that's the difficulty with your own place. It's not necessarily an advantage. You would think it is to have that freedom. And also you need the time to learn about certain things because, all the materials are new, the way they're used, and then the layers of history and everything. So it's, well, you said it. It's a bit more complicated than it looks.
I'm sure you'd probably call it this too. There's a sort of choreography going on here. There's a dance between the old and the new, and maybe a rhythm too.
Absolutely, all those words. And choreography is very apt because, I know this because it's our own. When you move in, you have to learn the choreography, and actually it takes a long time. And we still aren't there, 5 years later or whatever, however long we've been here. And I don't think we will. We'll keep on learning, I think.
Yeah. Well, you've said it's only through full sensory engagement that we can truly connect with a sense of place. I feel it here, but I imagine that you probably have a different idea every time you come here. This should become that, or...
Yeah, not so much in terms of the function of root. Well, it's just... I'm not sure really, but it's always different. And of course, light changes it every second. So.
Yeah, I now have the sun on my back, and I didn't just a second ago.
And you're illuminated. Your face is illuminated. You've gone from silhouette to full spotlight.
I've got the monastic glow.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's what's so nice about that. Yeah, anyway, that's another subject.
Let's go back to Halifax here. It's this really open, you could call it, really wide country part of England. How would you describe Halifax?
Well, the Pennines are treeless, so there's expanses outside the town. Halifax is in a bowl of these hills, and it's 19th century, and it's all York stone. The floors, walls, and ceiling of the buildings, the tiles, has a uniform material and colour, but it's very earthy, and the people are down to earth. And it was the centre of the Industrial Revolution.
Right. Both your parents came from these textile families.
Yeah. So it's all about having the water originally and to power the mills.
What are some of the earliest memories that stick in your mind from Halifax?
Well, the house that we lived in was nice because my bedroom was at the top of the stairs, so you could smell breakfast being made. And I had 4 sisters. There's always action, there's always stuff going on, and Dad going to work and Mum, and we had lots of animals and things like that. So it was a very pleasant upbringing with hindsight. And Yorkshire itself is, as I think I said that before, because you're not in a metropolis, it is much quieter in every respect. You don't go out. There's nowhere to go out to. So you eat at home, your entertainment's at home, and it's a very quiet life.
It's a certain silence.
Yes. Yeah. And it made me want to eventually get to a metropolis. But it took me a long time.
There's this beautiful photograph that you put in Minimum in the book by Bill Brandt, this sort of luminous image of the cobbled streets of Halifax. It's this beautiful image, and looking at it, the way material is treated almost, I see your work in it somehow.
Oh, yeah, Halifax is, I've got to be careful what I say, but it has had more influence than Japan, really. It's what started it all. But of course, a Bill Brandt photograph is not the reality. It was a tough life that he was depicting. A lot of poverty, very low incomes, and a lot of time in the mill and the noise. The Crosley's carpet mill, where my swimming teacher worked, you went in to collect him to go to the swimming pool, and he'd open the door, the side door of the factory, and even though there were probably several doors between you and the machine room, the noise was deafening, and I was in the car. I wasn't in the machine room. The photograph is beautiful, and the life was tough.
You left home early at age 7, right, for boarding school?
Yeah, that's kind of what you did, sort of middle class.
I read that you were particularly passionate about your racing bike, more so maybe than school.
Yeah, and of course they never understood that, of course, on a racing bike you could cover big distances. They thought a bike was to go to the end of the drive, I don't think they realised.
So where would you go on your racing bike?
Well, the early school I would just go into the countryside, but when I went to school down south, then I was able to go to towns and get around a bit.
At boarding school, I also read that you acquired a drum kit. Do you have any drumming memories?
Well, they took it away immediately. The drum teacher said, "Oh, well, you can practice on the book covers." So you were going like this on the book cover. They actually took the books away. Can you believe that? It's just idiotic. It's true, I was still making an irritating noise. But I wasn't a very good drummer anyway.
Well, you're creating a different kind of rhythm with architecture, right?
Yeah. Yeah, rhythm's an important word in architecture.
When did architecture and design enter the picture for you? You came across an issue of Domus at some point. Did you ever have dreams of becoming an architect when you were younger?
Definitely early on, I was interested in, what rooms were like and the atmosphere. And, I had ideas of creating a shop or an interior of something that you would use that was accessible to the public in a minor way, like a shop. So I, must have embedded early. Dad was always poring over plans for extensions to the factory and things like that. He built a really extravagant orangery in the garden. That was really pretty. And so there was always an architect in the kitchen. But Dad thought that you worked with architects rather than be one yourself. But it's interesting because he loved pottering around with plans. So I think he would like to have been one. He just didn't think he did that.
Well, we talked all about Japan before, which was sort of what happened next. I mean, the period which followed you spending 6 years working with your father in the family business. You headed to Japan, and then eventually in 1978, you come home. That's really when you turned to architecture, right? Like at that point, you kind of realized
there's nothing else to do.
Better figure out what I'm going to do with my life.
Yeah, there are quite a lot of false starts. Yeah. It's funny because I never worried. I never thought. I mean, my parents obviously worried. They said, you won't be happy unless you've got a job, which is slightly true. But I wasn't in any hurry to do anything particularly. I mean, I just kept trying things. And it was just amazing when somehow architecture seemed to work.
Do you think that somehow was to your advantage that you were, at least relatively speaking, late to the game, that you had this time to live?
Definitely. 100%. I mean, because I was in my early 30s and still at school. So, you'd had 10 years of experiencing architecture physically and also the travel and living in different countries. And I mean, it's a mature person's game, I think. You put up a building, it's there for a long time, normally, or can be.
And most architects, probably rightly, it takes decades before you're getting, if ever, you're getting a major public commission. Or
yeah, but I mean, because this place is 600 years old or whatever.
We're sitting in 600 years of history.
Well, I was determined to know everything about it and to take all the stones down, so I know every. There are no.
Didn't you hired photographers to come and photograph every inch, right?
Yeah,
and
different ones.
Didn't you bring a sound recorder here to record the sounds?
Yeah, but but the sounds that you and I hear, but he went off on a complete tangent and he recorded sounds that the human ear can't. So I don't know quite how I'm supposed to hear them. I think maybe you can. You should ask how you.
Yeah, Johnny probably knows. Yeah, we can ask our sound engineer.
Yeah, it's just an interesting. I mean, I slightly got put off by that because I should have got somebody else to do the bird song, because they're beautiful as well, and also the sound of the fish in the pond.
Well, wasn't one of your construction workers an ornithologist himself?
Yeah, but he was doing it for himself. He recorded 56 birds. He showed me his notebook. I should have. Bought it or something. Or I was a bit conscious that he clearly, obviously, wasn't doing any building work. But it's nice because also the wildlife. We had a snake, the foxes, obviously, and the heron comes to fish, and the badger.
Well, I think this project. Again, talk about waiting. You didn't do this project early in your career. You did this after 30, 40 years. What impact do you think that time had on what you brought to this?
Well, certain things get easier. But I still think, I was keen almost as soon as we'd finished this to get on to the next one for the family. But that was vetoed. Or this certainly wasn't encouraged. Because we were very busy in the office, I think I wasn't careful enough with allocating a team to do it. I thought I could do it myself and get by, and which is classic not taking your own advice. So it took a bit longer, but if I go back, every project we've done has been seen. It's been published, or it's
even Elveston Place, your first apartment, there was this World of Interiors issue with a sort of infamous photograph of the kitchen, this very spare minimalist kitchen with this big red steak on the countertop.
Yeah, well, you have to indulge the photographer, I guess. You don't have much control, especially at that age. I mean, I tried. It didn't seem to me, but...
well, the minimalist label was already there, because the headline of that story is Bare Minimum.
Yeah.
John Pawson's London flat takes understatement to the verge of painful silence.
Yeah, well, you can't keep a good journalist down. Or wordsmith, yeah.
Oh, there's the dog.
Yeah.
Tell me about Neuendorf House, this house in Mallorca that you did with Claudio Silvestrin. Really a remarkable thing, as you were sort of alluding to, in that it really hasn't changed in the nearly 40 years since it was completed.
Not a thing, no. I mean, I was there recently, which is fantastic, and that was again very fortuitous meeting, and we were. He was very generous to give us a go at designing the house. It was our first house, and very nearly the first project. Certainly the first project in the round.
Sort of become iconic, I would say. And I don't use that word very often with architecture, but there is a sort of iconography to that house. Maybe even in the way, this might be a bit hyperbolic, but it's like, in the way that Casa Malaparte has captured the imagination in this really, there's something more
fed itself in a way. We were conscious when we were doing it that we didn't, you try and approach it very logically, and Claudia and I sat down and we're in this hotel with the garden in Palma, and we didn't want a typical house with windows and a front door and things like that. So we wanted to hide that, and the courtyard approach helped a lot with that. And the thing is we didn't know about Barragan, which is hard to believe when you look at it. We knew a lot about Mies, but it wasn't really appropriate there.
Right. I read that you went to see his Barcelona pavilion while you were working on the house.
Yeah. But it doesn't show. And we just tried to approach it very, very logically. And it took, as I said, we had a lot of time on our hands. And then while it was being constructed, I was having problems with my relationship with Hester, and that was very distracting from the work. And so Claudio did most of this on-site supervision for the house, where certain decisions were made, like position of benches and things like that. But it's very nice going back, which I've done quite often recently, because it's just the same. But normally you don't get to enjoy a project you've done for somebody else. I mean, that's why it's important for me to do our own house.
Hey everyone, taking another quick break here to tell you a little bit about our weekly newsletter, where I share a behind-the-scenes look into each time-sensitive episode, and where we also get into various things in the cultural sphere our team at The Slowdown is paying attention to. You can sign up and join our 13,000 plus other subscribers by going to slowdown.media/newsletter. That's slowdown.media/newsletter. And now, back to the episode. Are there other projects of yours you go back to frequently?
Well, I'll go to the monastery. It's a different experience. And obviously when these places that we're redoing now, with different owners, we're going back to that. But no, I mean...
The Design Museum in London, maybe.
Yes, public buildings, yeah. But people used to think that, I would go to all these houses that I built. But I mean, clients don't... They don't say, hey, yeah, come anytime you want. Just drop by. You don't need to tell us. It's open house. Show your friends. It's like private.
Right.
And it's very interesting is that the handover day. One minute you're the boss of the site, and what you say goes, and you have this thing, and then it's the clients. And you have to knock on the door, and you may not be allowed in. Whereas, the day before
we
you were
need to open the door.
Yeah,
for the dog. I don't even remember where we were.
Talking about sex. That's another thing actually that you don't do as well in architecture.
Sex.
There was a Dutch woman who was trying to do a book about sex and architecture and came to see me in the office. It was very difficult to explain to her that it wouldn't be something that I would do because I didn't think, they're very separate things. Sorry, I know. Digressing there. No, just like you can't bring humor into design of architecture. You don't design a place and say, oh, this is sexy. I mean, you might find it Farnsworth House or something, but it's not.
Yeah. The only example I can think of is the Philip Johnson brick house, where he designed a room that I think it was Frank Lloyd Wright called his fuck studio.
Oh. He had a way with words.
Let's turn to your Notting Hill home, which you mentioned earlier. Late 90s. How do you think about the life of that project? Obviously a more intimate space than the home farm that's here because of the limitations of being in London.
Yes, very, very different. But it was interesting because we're on a communal garden, which is a nice London thing where you 40 houses back onto the same park and it's secure and private, but you have this space which you can share. And the tap for that, the garden tap, had lead pipes and it had been leaking for 9 months, they reckon. It had very slowly got down the garden, but it had found our lower ground floor. It had found it exclusively. So the water for 9 months ended up coming up through our kitchen floor. So we had to completely redo the house. And the insurance company were very good, although it's not the same. So we had to redo the house. But I kept thinking, well, what should I do? Is there something that I will want to change? And I didn't.
When was this?
Recently, like a year ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it took about a year to do it. I was all for renting somewhere fancy, and Catherine put her foot down. So we sort of camped with friends and borrowed things.
So in a way, it's a restoration of a work that you did in your lifetime, which is interesting.
Yeah. You look, can we get the same effect with better mechanics or whatever? And in the end, it's identical. But it's nice to be back in, because we're half the time here, half the time there. When we arrive here, we think, oh, how nice it is to be here. And then when we go back to London, we say, oh, how nice it is to be back in London.
Well, just, to play off your cookbook statement earlier, when I think about that house and I think about this house, which this house has 3 kitchens, that house has 1, but one very prominent kitchen, a trademark kitchen even, that sort of extends into the backyard in this sort of beautiful way.
Yeah, I just wanted the worktop to keep going. And we have a small backyard. And it's a way of dealing with all the stuff that you need in a backyard. Because it goes through a glass wall, it's 17 meters long.
I mean, that might be one of the most famous private kitchens in the world.
Because Catherine, sometime, I think 2015 or so, said, you should be doing this Instagram thing. And I said, well, that's not for me. She said, yes, definitely it is for you. And then she got Caius, my son, to set the account up. And then she posted the first picture herself. And of course, I didn't like it. So I took it down. I tried to put something else up. But the kitchen in London is usually the most popular post. Even now, if I post it with a teacup or something.
The algorithm likes the Pawson kitchen in London.
Yeah.
Another project that I feel like if we're talking about time is so essential to bring up here is the Foyle collection in Berlin. I mean, it is a literal temporal experience to go there. And maybe we could walk the listeners through what it's like, because it's this incredible structure. It's a pair of former telecommunications bunkers that are linked underground. It's a timed experience.
Well, it was built in the early 40s during the war, as you said, to run the railway network. But it was bomb-proof. The ceiling and the walls are 3.8 meters thick. The doorways are a chicane, so that they're blast-proof, and so are the air vents on the ceiling. So it's a massive, and also the shuttering for the concrete is really beautiful. And it's very precise, everything. But it's one story above ground, and I think two below, although we only use one story because the third one is already, below the canal, which is next door.
And visitors enter by coming down into this space. The first room you enter is pitch black. You stay there for, I think it's around 2 minutes.
Might seem like 2 hours.
In the pitch black.
Yeah.
And there's a John...
With others as well.
With others, with a group of maybe 30, 40. And it's a John Cage track.
Yeah. 2 minutes of silence. It's funny how people try and resist that. It's like, don't I need to do that? I just want to see the collection. But of course, universally, and they mostly all do, go through with it. I mean, it sets you up for seeing the collection and the space and everything, because you come out of that complete darkness. They open the door at the end, and so you get a very small amount of light comes in, so gradually. And then you go into the gallery, and the gallery is all very, very low lit. So things appear out of the gloom.
Well, it sort of makes me think of that Robert Wilson thing where it's like, embrace the silence.
Yeah.
Take the silence in. Let the silence tell you what it wants to tell you.
Well, here in the farmhouse, it's incredibly quiet. You hear your inner workings of your body.
Yep. The barking of a dog.
The barking. Well, that's an outside noise. Yeah.
The car on the gravel.
As moments. Yeah. That's true.
But a certain slowness unfolds. And I really felt that in the gallery in Berlin too.
I think he really that was a really good idea, because if you could almost apply that to other exhibitions in a different way to make people enjoy them more. Yeah,
I think how you enter a space.
Yeah.
Sort of this idea of space and time and light unfolding. There's also this room in the space called the Lake Room that I wanted to bring up, which is pretty fascinating. I mean, I know it was prompted by the flooding of this adjacent canal during the construction, but could you just share a little bit about this room? It's quite extraordinary. It's almost an art installation in and of itself.
Well, the basement is built in the same way as the ground floor, which is massive columns and this very, very thick ceiling and floor. And you get to see the thickness because of openings and things like that. When we were working on it, it's pretty extensive. One of the rooms was slightly lower in relationship to the water table, and that constantly had water in it when we were working. And also, there's a limit the budget. So we decided to cut off that room completely. But it looked so nice because they had water on the floor and it reflected the columns. So it was, like those underground things with the canal in Rome. So we just glazed it, the wall, and flooded it, and left the water there.
It's a built-in water feature.
Yeah, and it's big. I mean, it's very big.
Yeah, I mean, size of, a football field.
Yeah. Well, certainly with the reflection.
Intentionally, I've been holding back on bringing up the monks. I think this is the time to bring up the monks.
Welcome.
Let's come into our sacred space.
Yeah.
Your designs of monasteries, these date back to 1999 with your engagement with the Cistercian Trappist order. You've said that monasteries are like housing on steroids. And in the case of the monastery of Our Lady of Novi Dviu, how do you pronounce that?
Well, you've done well, that's it.
Novi Dviu?
Yeah, it just means new court.
Yeah, okay.
New courtyard, yeah.
In the Czech Republic, you've practically been building a city the past 25 years for these monks. Could you speak to your time there? I know you've spent the night many times. You've spent a lot of time with these monks. I guess an even more pointed question, what has it taught you about time, being with the monks and spending time there?
I mean, it is extraordinary. And I come back, and of course, Catherine is Catholic. So she's all in favor of me going, and going herself, but she hasn't been as often as I have. Every time I think, why don't I go more? Because it is, you feel, I mean, it's isolated, it's in the countryside, but it's incredibly quiet and peaceful. They are such a good example of, they're happy, they look at peace, their faces don't have the lines that we do, and the stress. I did a week with them and everything just dropped away. But they have a very ordered life. They get up at the same time and go to bed at the same time and have their meals at the same time and have 8 services a day, and they have half the day in study and half in manual work and so on. So it's every minute is sorted and healthy. But of course, a monk's life is very different from our lives. Very few people get the calling. And even people that get the calling and go and, enter the monastery and everything, don't necessarily stay forever. It takes like 10 years to become a monk. So there's a sort of safety net, so to speak, for them. Theirs is a very different life because it's no work, therefore no competition, or there's no talking, so there's no argument. And of course there's no sex. If you successfully take away that and the other things, then you have a very stressful life. So you can concentrate on God and, and on the routine. Obviously, people do go for a couple of weeks a year, to other places in America and, other Cistercian or Benedictine.
Yep. Yeah, I talked about that with Pico Iyer on the podcast.
Yeah. Also, it's all designed by us, so...
Right. Maybe run the listeners through your experience. What all have you designed?
Well, as you said, it's, they call them cities. It's a monastic city. And, the 40 or so monks never leave. The grounds and the buildings in the grounds and all the whole city has to be well thought out and has to be extensive enough for them to be comfortable. Never leaving. Obviously, the church is the center of everything. So that's where they spend 8 services a day. They get there through the cloister. They gather in the cowl room, put on the cowl, go down the cloister to the church, and then come back and do the same. And then they go in procession to the meals of the day.
And you've created all these spaces.
All these spaces, and the knives and forks were designed.
The industrial,
all that stuff spaces. All that was designed for it. So you have the school, you have the hospital, You have the workshops, the factory, and obviously the farm buildings. And
Are you working on anything for them right now?
yeah, they liked some of these things. It became a bit popular with visitors. So they found too many people in the back of the church distracting. So we built a church for visitors. There are plenty of chapels. So if their parents come or their brother or something, they can have mass for them, in a private chapel. But they wanted somewhere bigger.
You've also worked on a monastery in Burgundy, a basilica in Hungary, the St. Moritz Church in Augsburg, Germany, and a chapel in Dillingen, Germany, this wood chapel. What do you make of all this other ecclesiastical?
It's funny because I'm not being facetious, but I do sometimes forget what I've done. Also, we did a Church of England. We did an Anglican church in St. John's in Hackney, a big church.
And you did that project with Swarovski, this sort of reflective mirrored.
Oh yeah, yeah. That was in St. Paul's as well.
Yeah, that was in St. Paul's.
Yeah. No, our ecclesiastical side.
I mean, what is it about your practice, do you think, that these clients find so appealing?
Well, I think, it's obviously, you have to be careful with this story, but the Cistercian monks wrote to me. They were the first to get in touch and said they'd seen the Calvin Klein store and they thought it would make a good church.
Which Paul alluded to in his piece, the foreshadowing.
Yeah, it's weird, yeah. But what they were meaning is they hadn't actually seen it in a book, and the tables in the store were like altars. They could see the Calvin Klein store as a church. It didn't matter for them what was sold in it or underpants or whatever. It wasn't a... People thought there was some contradiction with monks and Calvin, but they saw the practical side. And the other ones saw the church that we did for the monks. But the funny thing is that I tried to explain to some of them, like the one in Hungary, that you can't take a Roman church that's had 1,000 years of work done in it and turn it into a minimal 21st century church, without upsetting a few people. So there was a lot of argument because they wanted me to take everything out, all the historical things. I think the first monks were looking for somebody who got it, who understood what they wanted. They weren't looking for necessarily a Christian or a churchgoer or a believer. They wanted somebody who understood what gave them the atmosphere in the church.
In that sense, would you say there is something monkish about your practice?
You need to know what's appropriate, I think. And, surprisingly, there are a lot of architects doing a lot of churches. And you look at them and you just wonder why they've ornamented them or put ornaments or designed them as they have done. Because they seem inappropriate to me. I'm not saying that they have to be minimal, but just things put in for the sake of them. Decoration, I suppose you would call it.
Kitsch.
Well, they could be kitsch, but even just stuff you don't need, to make it look different. Or shape, or, weird shapes. And, there are an awful lot of churches that are a bit weird.
Well, this connects us where I want to end, which is that I think your work at its heart is about, and this is going back full circle to your minimal book, which I just keep bringing up.
Well, please.
But
available in every good bookshop.
You talk about this notion of the, quote, excitement of empty space.
Yeah.
Which I think is it's sort of what Pico Iyer, when I interviewed him, described as thrumming silence. I was hoping maybe, could you wax here just for a minute or two on emptiness and the importance of boiling things down to the essential. Because I guess in this world that's full of so much noise or ornament, architectural or otherwise,
Well, I think your thing of saying, the thing about excitement,
mm-hmm.
and some people may think it a bit weird to be so excited by an empty space, but if you visit La Tournai Abbey in the south of France and you go into the church there, from the quite bright sunlight into this, very calm, very cool space. And I went in with at the time, I think he was 6 or 7, my son. It was fascinating to watch, even in that low light, how affected he was by the space and the silence. In a really sort of positive way, he sort of took it on board immediately. It clearly made him feel good. And he just wanted to express himself. And it was really nice to watch. And it was very funny because somebody told him to shut up. And there were like 2 other people there. And the other adult that was there told him to behave himself, the one that had told my son off. Because clearly the whole point is to express yourself and to feel the space and feel the... I was really pleased because I was trying to respect the man that was upset by it, but actually the man that said they were ridiculous. He should express himself.
Well, you've said if you're not affected when you walk into a building, then I don't think it's architecture.
You're right. Absolutely. Well, La Tournai is architecture in spades. It's one of the best buildings in the world.
Beyond its main purpose as shelter, do you think this should ultimately be the main point of architecture, that it should move us?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think we got well beyond that shelter business, really, in a way. I mean, it's like art. I mean, there wouldn't be life without art for us, I don't think. I mean, culturally as a species, you'd have to go a long way back to be just surviving. It's so important. Architecture is architecture. I'm not saying it is an art, but it's not fine art. I'm talking about fine art that you need. Plus a bit of architecture. You need more architecture. Don't forget architecture. Just see me doing myself out of a job. Just have a painting. I have a school friend who we have lunch from time to time, and we went to university. He's intellectually much more off than I have, but we were just talking, but he hadn't heard of Sanradam. And I said, oh, well, he's a 17th century Dutch church painter. You should look at it. Every time I see him now, he says, oh, I saw a Sanradam in Holland, or I saw the one in Glasgow at the museum. And so it's great. It's really nice that somebody who is so knowledgeable and used to take tours in Rome of the architecture, that I can introduce him to something. I
think you had a painting in your minimal book.
I did indeed. He could have read that. Your friends, one's friends don't necessarily read your books, do they? Do they read yours?
They congratulate me on the book.
Oh, because you gave them one.
Well, I guess just to finish, and on that point, do you see your work in this much longer arc of history? Do you see yourself in relation, the things you make, to something like Katsura in Kyoto, or one of these paintings you were just talking about?
Wow, no, I don't. And as I said, I've never thought about legacy or permanence. I mean, I've certainly tried to do my very, very best to make them as special as possible. And, there aren't that many of them. I mean, there's like 400 actual designed things in 40 years or something like that, 45 years. Maybe they've had an influence on some people, but I think it's very difficult to say. It hasn't been important to me. And therefore, it certainly hasn't affected the way I design or think. Or there's somebody sitting here in 500 years saying, well, there's this chap in 2021 or 2025 or something. Yeah.
Brought together this hodgepodge of buildings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I
His
think
wife
it's,
did the
I think
curtains,
it's safe to say this space will still be here in 500 years. I guess it's more curiosity of humanity will.
I know, yeah. Gosh, there's some bleak talk out there, isn't there, about the way we're heading?
Yeah, but we should end on a hopeful note.
Yes, we are. We are. I'm an optimist.
Yeah, where are you finding hope? What excites you about the future, John?
It's a good thought, isn't it? I mean, the obvious things, with the major advances in medicine, but then sometimes you worry about keeping us all alive for a lot longer, or comfort, or I don't get the population thing. It's still increasing so much, but on the other hand, there are certain countries need to produce more people. I'd like to avoid this one, I think.
I said hope, John.
Hope, yeah. Yeah. We'll get there, won't we? We always have. There'll be some way of a solution to using up all our resources. Yeah, I wonder if I avoid thinking about it. I wonder if it's a technique. It's pretty good here, though.
I'm letting the silence sit. Any final words?
No, I thought the silence was rather good, actually. I think I've told you the story before, but finally, after years, finally got to my favourite building, Farnsworth House, by Mies van der Rohe. And I knew the owner, and I was let in by the housekeeper, or the person that looked after it. I mean, it wasn't occupied. She was a young college girl and very excitable, and was talking a lot, and it was the first time I'd ever been there, and I'd entered into the space, and it was really quiet out there, except for you could hear the river. I suddenly thought, I said to her, why don't we have a minute's silence in memory of Mies? Because the talking was driving me nuts, which is a bit unfair, because she's a really nice person, and she was just trying to help. Anyway, and she was so competitive that I didn't last. She kept going for 10 minutes. So I broke the silence after 10 minutes.
I bet our listeners are like, are they still there?
Is anyone there? Is anyone there? It's really nice, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's great.
No, it's so great.
You can't. Well, that could be the new podcast, actually. 60 minutes of no John Pawson.
All right, let's end there.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, John. This is the great, dry British wit of John Pawson that I love. That's a great place to end. Extra thanks to our Season 11 presenting sponsor, the high jewelry Maison Van Cleef & Arpels. Since its founding in Paris's Place Vendôme in 1906, Van Cleef & Arpels has developed a distinctive blend of poetry and refinement. With its jewelry and watchmaking collections, the Maison is an invitation to a timeless universe of beauty and harmony. You can discover more at vancleefarpels.com. That's www.vancleefarpels.com. And thank you for listening. You can find more episodes of Time Sensitive on our website, timesensitive.fm, or wherever you listen to podcasts. To keep up with our latest time-sensitive episodes and get behind-the-scenes updates, sign up for our newsletter at slowdown.media/newsletter. That's slowdown.media/newsletter. You can follow us on Instagram at slowdown.media. Our theme music was composed by Billy Martin. This episode was produced by Ramon Broza, Mimi Hannon, Emily McDonald, Kylie McConville, and Johnny Simon. And now, if you're still listening, some friendly birdsong we recorded while at John's house in the Cotswolds.